Washington's making a power play for five-star cornerback Brandon Arrington.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He writes with me over at Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the days. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Just a quick reminder to all the everydayers out there, by the way, wherever you get this podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, make sure to click that subscribe button down below. Click the little bell as well so you never miss when we post a new video. From the audio only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. And follow us wherever you're on social media, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, at Locked On Huskies. Got a whole bunch of fun off-season content, including recruiting stuff that's going to be going up on all forms of social media, because Lars, we've got a lot of recruiting stuff to get to today. At the end, we're going to talk about a fun talking point that Josh Pate brought up in a recent episode of his show on if Washington could pull off the upset of the year. We'll get to that in a little bit, because 4-star wide receiver Daniel Odom, who's committed to Oklahoma, set an official visit to join this big group of visitors on Friday. We already kind of knew that one was coming. The one we did not see coming was 5-star cornerback Brandon Arrington.
The example of, if you can get him, try and reel him in. And I think this is kind of that Fisch example where we talked about that May 30th weekend last year, where you took a bunch of big swings and you didn't get him. This is one where, whether you get him or not, the fact that you were able to get Brandon Arrington on campus for an official visit at this point in his recruitment speaks volumes, because I don't remember Washington being mentioned for him 2 months ago, 3 months ago, 4 months ago. And so is this a sign of, does this mean Washington's getting a commitment? Probably not. They're saying there's not a non-zero chance, though. And I think the only thing that you can do is put yourself in a position, and that's what this is. And it more or less is curious for me where, what's the ultimate driving force behind it? Is it relationships? Is it curiosity on Arrington's part? Whatever it may be, the fact that you're getting him for a visit is already a home run, in my opinion.
So I certainly agree with you there. So let's dive into that. I think there are a few things at play here. One of them is, as he told, I believe, his On3's Chad Simmons, was he's looking for a school that's going to recruit him, develop him, and get him to the next level, and a school that will get him on the field early. Washington is certainly great in all three of those departments. It's something I discussed a little bit on yesterday's show, where we look at the cornerback group next year, and you and I firmly believe that Leroy Bryant and Dylan Robinson are going to be the two starting corners next year. But behind that, it's kind of a toss-up, where you and I really do hope that players like Darian Clemens or Mons Adams can take a big step forward, but there is a major opportunity for someone of Brandon Arrington's caliber to come in and just assert themselves and say, hey, maybe I'm even going to take a starting spot if I can, where he has that level of upside. I don't think that would end up being the case, but at the very least, that's somebody who can come in and play a lot. Now, I say that because it's also something where we look at the rest of his top five, and it is schools that are really good on the recruiting front when it comes to just developing these relationships and making a big push to get these commitments. It's Alabama, Penn State, Texas A&M, USC, and Oregon. Those are the other five schools on his list. I believe Steve Wiltfong put in a crystal ball for him to choose Texas A&M when he commits on July 5th, but he also said that it's really, really close, and whoever can sell him on those three things is the school that's going to win the battle. And not too long, and we're reading too much into it if we dive too much into that. But one thing he posted right after he announced he's coming to Washington for an official is, this one feels like home. And that's something that this coaching staff has done a really good job of selling when these players get on campus, is we're trying to build something special up here. And after getting commitments from Cody Green and Derek Coleman-Brusa, you're really trending in the right direction, but this would be a whole different level if you're able to pull it off.
Oh, absolutely. The key there is, you're at a whole different level already at this point. But what intrigues me the most is that, as you mentioned, kind of reading the tea leaves, reading some of the online things. His primary recruiter on 247 is listed as Jordan Paopao. That one is also intriguing to me, where you're looking at Ryan Walters in terms of 5-star cornerback. You're talking about John Richardson. You're talking about the defensive coaching staff. But I think Paopao has always been a relationship type of guy. So I think the tie-in together, where you're talking about playing time early, Paopao doesn't control that, but having Walters and John Richardson does. But if there happens to be an established relationship between Arrington's family and Paopao for, going back to whatever, you tie all those things together. So whatever happened to get him on campus versus would get him to commit might be two completely different things. But if you're Jedd Fisch, whatever it takes to get him on campus is one thing. And then getting him on campus, selling him on the fact that, hey, you can play early here, like you mentioned. You have all the resources here. What the one thing Jedd's talked about is getting guys to the next level in various, position groups and things like that. The overarching program theme is the 33rd team. So when you're talking about preparing guys for the NFL, that's literally what Jedd is selling to everybody. And now you put a 5-star caliber, the number one player in terms of as an athlete in California, and really honestly, top 3 in the class, depending on which ranking you're looking at. That's the type of caliber of player Jedd's trying to go after. When you talk about the schools, Texas A&M, Oregon, Alabama, Washington's beat Alabama a couple of times now on the recruiting show this recruiting cycle. You got Cody Green from Oregon. So Jedd's shown in other positions, hey, we can go toe-to-toe, head-to-head with some of these other programs and actually come out on top. So now if you're Brandon Arrington, you're thinking, I'm not like the guy that the only one believing this. You have plenty of other recruits now, plenty of other examples of high-caliber elite recruits in the 26th class saying, you know what, I believe Jedd is going to do all these things for me. And now Brandon Arrington seeing that and saying, actually, you know what, hang on, let me, before I commit in July, get up to Washington for an official visit just to see what it's all about. But it's that, the fact of, is Pow Pow his lead recruiter or whoever is leading it? Again, this is clearly, I think, a whole staff involvement at this point.
Absolutely. So one thing you say there is at least getting up and checking it out, where as he continues to just say, hey, this is really close. And yeah, whoever is doing these things is going to win the day for me. It's one of those things where you and I, before we jumped on here, we were just, as we were prepping the show, we're like, we feel very, very good saying Washington is very much on the outside looking in right now, but they have done enough of a job to close the gap to put themselves in a position to even be considered. That is a good thing. And it's a good step where we're not saying, oh, if it's a hat on the table and he chooses Texas A&M, that's, a good thing. No, but it just shows where this recruiting staff is going under Jedd Fisch. And as they try to continue to push for these big high caliber prospects, as you said, the number one corner in the country, according to On3, number one athlete on 247 Sports, the number one player in California. As you said, these are the kinds of players that Jedd Fisch wants to recruit because it's, hey, we've developed these 3- and 4-star players really, really well throughout our time. Trust us with this development process. These high-end 5-star players. Cody Green did that. It's, if you trust us, let's see what we can do with you, because we've already shown we can get players who were under-recruited or really not recruited at all in some cases to the NFL. Now let us do that for these 5-star insane athlete sort of players. And I think that's something that, before we move on here, that I wanted to mention is I wouldn't be surprised if, I'm sure a lot of these schools are selling Brandon Arrington on also running track at whatever program he ends up committing to. And that's something that I think Washington could end up selling really, really well when we look at what this track and field team has turned into. If you want to go read more about that, by the way, our good buddy Alex Katzen does a phenomenal job covering all that over on Huskies Wire. That's something where under Andy and Mauricio Powell, this track program has become one of the best in the country. And for somebody who, if you go read any write-up on what Brandon Arrington is as a player and an athlete, Olympic hopeful is in there because he's broken records set by gold medalist Noah Lyles. He ran a 10-2-1 in the 100-meter dash and a 23-5 to win the 200-meter dash at the state championships a couple of weeks ago in California. That is just such a high-level athlete. If you can sell him on whatever it is, if it is playing 2 sports, whatever it is that you can get a guy like that on campus, that's a good thing. And as this staff continues to just set its feet here and build the program, build the foundation of what Washington is going to be, selling players like this is going to continue to be more and more important year in and year out. Because Lars, another one of those guys is 4-star wide receiver Daniel Odom. And we'll get to that right after a message from our good friends over at FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live with player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays. Fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. I feel like the Huskies are going to do a lot of winning big this season. Their over-under for the season right now is set at 7.5 on FanDuel. I love the over there. I look at some of these road games where there's going to Michigan, going to Wisconsin. That's going to be tough, but kind of balance that out with a trip to UCLA. Washington State is going to be an interesting rivalry game. You go cross country to Maryland, but I'm not sure how I feel about the Terps this year. So I look at that combined with a 20-game home winning streak, and I think 7.5 is a really, really nice bet to take the over right now for Washington. And if you're new to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com, place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. So Lars, 4-star wide receiver Daniel Odom has been committed to Oklahoma since January. You and I, when we talked about any potential surprises on a show the other day, as the Everydayers know, we didn't talk about Brandon Arrington. We had no idea that one was going to be in any way, shape, or form possible. But we did mention Daniel Odom, and we said this is something where we're really intrigued to see how this process plays out. He's got 3 official visits set, one obviously to Oklahoma, and he's also visiting Florida State. But I look at this recruitment right now, and I think Washington is sitting in a really, really good spot for him.
I agree. And the old Florida State reference, just where I stand on Florida State, just happened just ever since that. Anyways, I'm not going down that road. But you look at the head-to-head that Washington has had with Oklahoma. You got Marcus Harris, which was a different situation because early offer, stayed committed for a long time, coaching change on both sides, ends up coming to Washington, staying on the West Coast. This one for me, you always seem like you were going to get one of the Bosco athletes, receivers, and I can understand why Madden Williams is still going to come up and make that visit, but Daniel Odom just kind of seems like the guy where if you're betting on one of the two to choose Washington, I'm picking Daniel Odom. Now that doesn't mean that they don't want Madden Williams or that just a free visit. You still bring up the guy if he wants to come up for a visit just to give him a shot. But it always kind of has seemed like Daniel Odom was going to be that guy if you were going to get one of the two Bosco receivers. And you like it. I mean, you obviously the amount of guys that have come from Bosco that go to Washington, the list is long, not just Trent McDuffie. But you also think, CJ Wallace, his teammates coming up. So there was always kind of seeming like it was going to be Daniel Odom, but now that we knew it was official, it's like, okay, now it's just a matter of if it was going to be Oklahoma, I feel like he would have been there by now. Wouldn't come up for this visit. You can always, give it a shot, but it just seems like the more this has gone on, the longer it's chipped away. It just seems like Washington might be his destination when it's all said and done.
So I like the thought process that you're on there. I don't necessarily agree on the Madden Williams stance that you're taking there. And let me tell you why. It's something I was reading this morning. I think it was Greg Biggins or somebody over 247 put out a really nice article talking about some of these receivers that are coming up this weekend in Vance Spafford, Daniel Odom, and Madden Williams, and they all played youth 7-on-7 together. So these are guys that have a long relationship together, all playing in Southern California, growing up. Obviously, Vance Spafford's at Mission Viejo, while the other two are at St. John Bosco. But it's one of those things where if these guys are really interested in playing together at the college level, which is a thing for a lot of these kids that grow up in the same area, you have the opportunity to sell that. Where I feel like Vance Spafford is still someone where I continue to feel better about that one. The rumor is if it's not Georgia, if he doesn't stay there, it's going to be Miami or Washington. And I just feel like the West Coast connection might end up winning out there. And it was something I was thinking about as we were just kind of prepping is I feel like there is one exception where you take more than 3 receivers in this class. And if it's all 3 guys this weekend plus Mason James want to commit, that's the only way. That's the only way. Because as we like to say on here, Jedd Fisch is not in a position to turn down talent. And if you're adding 4 wide receivers that are all, high-end blue chip prospects with great ceilings, you're going to find a way to do that, even though you took 5 receivers last year, because it's about stacking talent and letting the best players win out and having them rise to the top. That's what it's all about. And I think that bringing all of these 3 guys up this weekend, plus CJ Wallace, I'm glad you mentioned that. And of course, Derek Zammit, the 4-star quarterback commit, having all of those guys on campus at the same time and just building some kind of relationship and getting to know each other. And with Derek being an Elite 11 finalist now, these are all things that you can sell and just say, hey, you guys love playing together back in the day. We're going to give you an opportunity to do that here at Washington. And oh, hey, by the way, here's one of the best quarterbacks in the country, and he's going to be the guy throwing you the ball when you're up here.
And this is an example of, given that Derek Zammit is from New Jersey, this is really it's harder to get him out than most other guys, where it's not like an in-state kid or a California kid where you can kind of just make that easy, 2 hour, hour and a half, 2 hour trip up from Seattle in terms of a flight time. He's coming all the way from New Jersey. So I think it really does seem like, and I'm glad you pointed that out, it's a really concerted effort on the staff to get their top premium targets on campus this weekend. And you're talking about, all of them being receivers. Like I could easily see a world where if Mason and Spafford want to commit, you take both. And then if Madden and Daniel want to commit, you take both, because you're talking 2 inside and 2 outside. Not that you're pigeonholing Mason, James, and Vance to be inside guys, but just in the numbers and how that could work out, that would logically make sense to me. And again, yeah, if you those are always the good positions to be in, where you're not talking about, do you take this fringe guy or that fringe? No, it's, well, this elite talent wants to commit to us. That elite talent wants to commit to us. You don't say no to that type of talent. You let him sort it out. And Jedd's even kind of touched on this, where that 85 number that he was so hard and fast on doesn't necessarily seem to be hard and fast now. And this is kind of an example of that. Same thing with Brandon Arrington, where if you're at, call it 87, 88, 89 scholarships going into the 26 season, okay, cool. Good enough for me, because if this is the type of caliber that's putting those numbers up, you're willing to sacrifice a little bit on the back end, where for a fact there's going to be a return on investment on all 4 of those guys. And whichever one sorted out, however early they played, so be it. Like, if it's Desmond Roebuck beating out Mason James, great. If it's the other way around, great. You're putting yourself in position to have that competition, and no matter who ends up winning out, Jedd's like, the talent won out, who cares?
That's such a great point, because it was something I was thinking about, where, as we kind of await the house settlement and await just kind of what NIL and all those sort of numbers are going to look like moving forward, it's a really great just conversation to have about revenue sharing, where the reason that Jedd wanted to stay at 85 was to maximize the revenue share for each player on the roster, which is a very smart way to think about it. But having, if you're going to go over, have 86, 87, 88 players on scholarship, that's fine. But then it's all about having a solid NIL collective that's going to help you bridge that gap in some way, shape, or form to make sure that you're still maximizing players' values. And that's where I think Montlake Futures has done a really good job of fundraising and doing everything they have over the last year and a half. It's really cool seeing some of the fans get involved on Twitter and trying to pump that out and say, shout out to one of our good buddies, Insider Coker, who is very good at just going on Twitter and saying, hey, if you want to donate to Montlake Futures, that's what funds moments like these, like, the USC win in 2023, going to the Sugar Bowl, going to the national championship. And I think that's something that Jedd Fisch and this coaching staff have done a really good job getting on board with, and saying, we want to aim big. We're not trying to, just gradually improve. It's no, we're trying to shoot for the stars. We are trying to find ways to make the college football playoff every year and be one of the best teams in the Big Ten consistently. And that's why you and I have spent so much time on recruiting as well, is because these things all come together. It's when you're consistently bringing in high-end talent and letting the best players win out and developing them and sending them to the NFL on a regular basis, like Washington has been so good at for the longest period of time, all of these things will end up just falling into a row the way you want them.
Yeah, it's like you have this. We talk about where Washington stands as a national brand, like how the gold W, the purple and gold. You understand. You see the gold W, and you think Washington. That's why Jedd. It's why you brought Jedd here. It's why you made the investments that you have. It's a belief in the self, the belief that the people that you brought in, and like you mentioned, like we're talking about recruiting, because again, the staff invests. The players are showing the interest. It all feeds off of each other. And you look at some of the premier programs where year round it's tennis, it's Texas, it's Oregon. There's all these programs, Alabama, Georgia. You go down that list every year. The teams that are in contention for the CFP, it's year round. What matters? Reloading, restacking. Getting back, not just adding 1 or 2 pieces here and there. It's across the board. How invested are you, literally and figuratively, in what you're trying to build? And clearly the staff is, and now I think we've seen the fan base show when it matters, they will reciprocate that interest. And so now I think this is a perfect marriage between a coach that loves to produce, develop, and things like that, and a fan base that's been crying for, give us a winner consistently year in and year out.
And absolutely. And that's one of the fun things about what Jedd Fisch and this program and this coaching staff are trying to do. It's build that program to be a consistent winner, it's about getting uncomfortable sometimes and saying, oh, I'm so used to seeing it done this way or that way under Chris Peterson and Kalen DeBoer, who are very similar in a lot of ways in that respect. And having Jedd, who is very in your face about, we are going to be better. We need to find ways to get better. And doing things like, oh, Madden Williams is going to be a Heisman Trophy finalist. Just with the way he likes to be big and boisterous and talk a big game like that. Those are things that I think might seem a little uncomfortable at first, but if he's able to back it up on the field in 2025, it's going to continue to pay off if he wants to, continue building this year in and year out at that level, which I certainly believe he will. And Lars, big way to help build that is by beating Ohio State. So Lars, I was listening to Josh Pate a little bit, and he was talking about Washington being a team that's very underrated right now. He's talking about the transfer portal class and Madden Williams being underrated compared to, some of the big national names that people are buzzing about this offseason. And then he started talking about the early part of the schedule, which is Colorado State, UC Davis, and Wazoo in the non-conference slate. And then Ohio State comes to town. And he said something very interesting. So I feel good saying it this way, as the world's biggest jinx on this program. And he said, if that's a candidate for upset of the year, I wouldn't be surprised. And I really like where he's going with that, because it is something that you and I have spent a lot of time talking about off air, brought a little bit of it on air. We're gonna get way more into that throughout the summer and as we get a little bit closer to the season. But this is a really, really inexperienced Ohio State team coming off the national championship. They have some incredible talent in Caleb Downs and Jeremiah Smith. There is no denying that. Julian Sand looks like he's going to be a really, really good player at quarterback. But you kind of look all over that roster, and it goes back to what we were just saying a minute ago. It's Ohio State has done a really, really good job stacking talent and building this program from the ground up through high school recruiting, where every single year it's, oh, this really talented player who everybody was after 2-3 years ago is now ready to compete because Josh Simmons is, a first-round pick by the Kansas City Chiefs, or whatever you want to say. And I really do feel like being that inexperienced early on in the season and having to come into Husky Stadium might be a problem for them.
It's the perfect storm for Washington, and it's probably the worst-case scenario for Ohio State, where you're looking at it right at the start of the Big Ten schedule. You have to come across the country, unfamiliar, Washington relatively still unknown in terms of what you actually have at that point in the season. DeMond only will have, call it 6 starts under his belt, I think, at that point going into that game. Correct me if I'm wrong, 5-6 starts somewhere in that ballpark. So the book is not totally written on DeMond, and a lot of the pieces that you're going to see this season haven't necessarily seen the field in a starting capacity yet. And so to me, this was always a game where if you're ever going to beat Ohio State, this would probably be the setup to do it, where you're at home at Husky Stadium early on in the campaign, in the month of September, late September, obviously. But just at a time where, when you get into the meat of that Big Ten schedule, injuries start to happen, this is the most gettable Ohio State's going to be for Washington. And in a way, we talked about it a couple months ago, it's setting up a lot similar to the Michigan game that I think people are giving credit for. And obviously Josh Pate, student of the game, is starting to pick up on that, where you're looking at things. This isn't Ohio State last year. This isn't Ohio State a couple of years ago, which was just absolutely loaded and didn't happen to make the national championship. Again, so very loaded. Jeremiah Smith and Caleb Downs, obviously, well known. And I think it even goes beyond that. But you just look at it and think, yeah, but Washington still has the pieces to match, the coaching to match. And it's at home. If this game is in Columbus, I don't think we feel the same way, where no disrespect to Jedd and things like that, but that game in the shoe versus that game on the lake, I think, that makes a huge amount of difference. And that's why we talked about it at the end of the last segment, where making that investment as fans, showing up, being loud, having that presence to give Washington any competitive edge that they can have. Those are the type of games and moments that you live for. And so, again, if Washington ends up beating Ohio State on that day in late September, the longer this goes, I truly won't be surprised, because, again, we know how good DeMond can be. The questions that are going to come up, between now and then are going to be, did the offensive line hold up? Did you do enough in the trenches? Because everything else is you can kind of figure out ways to balance out that matchup a lot more than people think traditionally.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the fun things. This is why I've spent a lot of time talking about Takario Davis versus Jeremiah Smith. I think that matchup is like, again, as you said, Jeremiah Smith is an otherworldly talent, but Takario Davis might be the best cornerback in the country to match up with him. And that's something where if you can find a way to neutralize that matchup and make it a net even outside of what, would normally be a massive advantage for Ohio State, you're giving yourself a shot in that regard. And I think that you can find that at a couple other spots on the field we're going to talk about that way more as the game gets closer. But it's one of those things that the more I look at it, the more I say, I do feel like Washington is in a position to pull at least one of those sort of upsets this season. I feel like they're going to end up being a little bit underrated when they go to Michigan, when they go to Wisconsin too. So those are other games that I'm really watching as games that could turn into big wins for Jedd Fisch this season. But I see Ohio State as the first opportunity for him to get a truly signature win. And I say that even including what last year's Michigan game was. I think that matters on a very different plane than what this is right now, because that win mattered for a lot of reasons. Obviously, they were a top 10 team that didn't finish anywhere close to that by the end of the year, but that was more for the revenge factor, I believe, than anything else. And I think that if you beat Ohio State this year, that's one of those things that people around the country are going to look at and say, oh, we didn't really realize Washington had that in them. Obviously, for any of the everydayers that listen to this show, we know that's not the case. But that's one of those things that it could be used as a launching pad to really propel this program forward under Jedd Fisch, where it's one of those things where if you win that game, all of a sudden you're most likely 4-0, considering the non-conference slate, and you're heading across country to Maryland, and all of a sudden you're probably ranked, and there are a whole lot of things that go on top of that. But you just kind of look at the schedule from that point on, and it's, oh yeah, this is a tough game. That's a tough game, but Washington beat Ohio State. All of a sudden that game feels, 15% more winnable at the very least, because you're rolling in there with some sort of confidence of not only beating the reigning national champion, one of the best teams in your conference year in and year out. It's just one of those things for an upstart young team that Jedd Fisch, really had to take the scraps of last year and make the best of it. Now we're starting to see what the identity of this team is going to truly be in 2025. I really like where this is going, and there's so much that's setting up here just in a really, really nice way for Washington to come out on top.
Absolutely. And it also validates kind of how we started the show, where when you see recruits, and when you talk about getting better talent every year, recruits will see that. And you're like, oh, wait, Washington's not only hanging with Ohio State, but beating Ohio State, beating Michigan, and you look at some of the games that they could win this year. That's how you build it. That's how you add legitimacy to your program. You're not just selling, hey, we're going to throw a bag at this guy and that guy to get him up there. You see the proof is in the substance of the program on the field. If you're Brandon Arrington, you see that. If you're Daniel Odom, you see that. Why go to Oklahoma? Why go to Miami? Like you mentioned, all these other schools vying for guys to Washington. Looking at why go all the way out there when you can just stay on the West Coast, come up to Seattle, and make Seattle a destination. It starts with games like this where it's, wow, I never thought – you mentioned it perfectly. I never thought about Washington in that light where we talk – you want to talk about revenge factor. I know it's a little bit outdated now, but even the Rose Bowl, losing to Ohio State in the Rose Bowl years ago under Chris Peterson, you finally can get that get back. And in a sense, you will never truly get that get back like you did with Michigan, but it's just proving that you actually have substance and legitimacy behind everything you're saying, because we talk about it all the time. You can sell whatever you want. You can say you develop, you put guys in the NFL, 33rd team, all that. That's great. If you don't show it on the field and win on Saturdays, it doesn't really matter. And I think this is a perfect year, a perfect example of a team where it's not Ohio State at their best, but it's still a pretty darn good Ohio State team. And Ryan Day is still there, and Brian Hartline is still there. You obviously don't have the Washington connection that you did last season with the Mecca and JTT and guys like that, which I think honestly does kind of benefit because you don't have that. There's no ulterior kind of thoughts in your head of, hey, let's see if we can kind of prove a message here. It's, no, you're not. That's already gone. That past is already, that ship has already sailed. Set it moving forward to say, you know what, Jedd's here now. This is what the program is about. We can beat Ohio State. We can go on the road, beat Oregon. We can go on the road to some of these other schools and hang and win. And I think that will only help Jedd as he continues to build this program.
So I think you made a perfect point. I want to circle back around to one thing where you talk about the revenge factor against Ohio State. I thought about it in a totally different light than that, because instead of that, I think about it as to what 2023 Oregon was when you talk about the recruiting aspect of it all. Because what's one thing that Dash Byerly told us on this show, and so many other things that you and I talked about from the 2024 class, 2025 class, and now 2026, is a lot of kids, their first experience at Washington was a game day visit for that game against Oregon. And it was, wow, I didn't know that the crowd was like that. I didn't know that Washington was that. And I think that's a really good point to, just to bring up with what you were talking about, because those are really great selling points for Washington. Is there were so many kids where I know Dijon Lee was in that boat, and if maybe things were different if the coaching staff just doesn't leave on a whim after the national championship. And you could probably say the same for a whole lot of other recruits who were up here for that game. That game left a major impact on them, and this Ohio State game has an opportunity to do that as well if Washington can find a way to win that game, because of what Washington is when it's at its best, as you and I have mentioned several times on the show. And that's what I'm really watching, is as Jedd tries to build a long-term future, I think that's something where we're going to see Cody Green, Derek Coleman-Barusa, all sorts of those guys on the sideline already as commits in this class. But I think as we look around at, hey, that kid's an uncommitted 26 kid who maybe they're trying to make a late push for, or those are some of the top players in 2027, 2028. And as Jedd continues to try to build this through high school recruiting, this could be a real launching pad game for him in several different departments. Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you all the everydayers for tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the offseason. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. So that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating the channel with new content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you don't miss when we post a new video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comments section. And if you're audio only, please leave us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Friday.